and for the movie that he loves.
Hey, what's up, William?
Hey, William.
What's
What's
up?
up, William?
So now that you're here, I don't remember.
Is that Sprite?
It was all like, oh, Sprite.
He says
No,
that's
Mountain Dew.
Sprite.
Oh, man, it look like
But
Sprite.
anyway,
That's the randomest comment ever.
yeah, I know. It's
Same
right.
company.
But anyway,
I
William,
think
I don't
Mountain Dew is
remember.
Pepsi.
It is actually.
I remember we talked about this like a long time ago, but I kind of forgot your stance on it. Like, you saw Goyer's comments on BVS saying that like it was a mistake for them to do it after Man of Steel. How do you overall feel about that stance?
And that part of his statement, he's wrong, because it's common to think that, and he has a right to his opinion. He's a director. He's in the industry. But it goes back to the fact that us fanboys at that time lacked the capacity to see things any other way than what we first saw with Marvel. We just weren't bright enough to appreciate that there may have been another way of building foundations to a story. I don't need 5-10 Superman movies to get to the point where I'm going to be to begin with. When you're DC, you tell stories the DC way. When you're doing Marvel, you tell it the Marvel way. There are two distinct genesis to the way they start their storylines off. Marvel did what was right for them. They did what they could with the characters that were available to them. They decided they were going to tell an Avengers origin story. Once they made that decision, there was no guesswork to it. You started with the Avengers characters that you had at that time. That were available to you, with a few exceptions, with Black Widow switching out for Wasp and all that. But for the most part, the core of your beginnings of your first 5 issues of the Avengers are in the way that they built it up, and then they went with the Infinity side. That was right for them. That was right for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that was right for what Snyder was doing in the first couple of movies. DVS was part of his arc. Batman in the formation of the Justice League was the story he was telling. And when you're DC and you've been around literally before there was even a thought of Marvel as a collective company, DC had been doing this for 20 years. So you don't need to do things that way. Justice League, 63% of all DC characters either came from a Trinity book or a Justice League book. You go along your shelf, any of your comic book stores, that's where those characters come from. So that is the basis, if you wanted to, and you should, that you are going to start your universe in. Your stories are told through the lens of that, because that is the identity of your company. That is not the same for Marvel, and vice versa. So I don't agree with people saying, well, there should have been a Man 2, 3, 5, 10. You didn't need to do that. Tell the story you were going to tell, and if it included the formation of the Justice League, that's your story. That is your building of Superman. Every time you see Superman on the screen, that is your development of that character. Same thing with Batman. Now, where they fucked it up was not following through. I can agree with people there, because we look at it in hindsight now, because they screwed it up, because you didn't get to finish the original arc and swing back to the single characters like he intended to do. You're looking at an incomplete project. So it's not real fair to really, to judge those movies when the originator of those stories never got a chance to fulfill what he was going to do with it. It's an incomplete story that got picked up by people who weren't as talented to try to pick up and go in a different direction. So now when we look at those movies, what if now after the original Darkseid arc was done and he would have handed it off and you would have gotten your Man of Steel 2, you would have gotten your proper Wonder Woman 2 and all that other stuff that, and an Aquaman that wasn't 5 years and, in between the original one. If you would have gotten things the way that they were originally planned out, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because all the character development would have been done. So no, I don't agree with them at all there.
Okay, well, I do agree with you. Like, I did not expect them to do the exact same format that Marvel is doing. I don't need to see individual films for every character.
Oh no, not 10 or 20 years. For sure.
However, I talked about this before, and you know how much I love Man of Steel. I think it's great. However, we cannot get over the fact that was a very divisive movie. People were very split on Henry Cavill's Superman, and it's like, I feel like it would have served his character better if they got at least one more movie for people to get used to his version of Superman before we started throwing all this other stuff and a new Batman.
You can't acquiesce to pussies, though. You have to tell your story. You have to have enough confidence in your story. It's just because something's divisive, pick a side. If you either put on the grown man drawers and make a decision and go forward with it, or you keep the diapers on and you stay down in the mailroom. These guys are at the top. These guys are the CEOs. These guys are the directors, the creators, producers. You do not have the option to be a pussy when you're doing this. You are never going to make a DC character that's been around for 80 years without divisiveness. It is not going to happen. And if you can't deal with that as a creator, then you need to get the hell out of the chair and let someone else who doesn't give a fuck get in. The fact that Man of Steel was divisive, so what? Pick a side. And what they didn't do is pick the side that was making them money. You listen to the dumb, 71% drop after BVS. Like I said, I guarantee you there are jobs being lost now in the last 5 years because they never matched that again for the most part. With the exclusion of characters that came from that genesis that Snyder created, the two most successful movies since he helmed them for the most part were Wonder Woman and Aquaman. There is no who cast Aquaman? Who took the risk to cast Aquaman when everybody else was saying he's a blonde, blue-eyed guy with a crew cut? That was Zack Snyder. Who cast Gal Gadot when everybody's saying, no, she's too skinny? That was Zack. So even the movies that he wasn't directly directing. So when you go beyond those movies, that's where you start seeing the mistakes. And so like I said, who cares? Divisiveness, who cares? Tell your story. You either have the confidence to tell your story, or you need to be doing another job. There's plenty of talented people that have balls, or have the intestinal fortitude to stick with it. Kevin Feige was one of them. You didn't see there was a lot of Marvel fanboy whining at the time. He just wasn't listening to it. He knew what his story was going to be. He had his mindset on what he was going to do, and he made minor adjustments. He didn't, at no point in time did he ever entertain a wholesale turnover of his project just because some grown-ass men wearing superhero shirts like me shit in their pants. At no point in time was that ever part of his decision-making. He kept forward, and look what he got. I don't agree with the decisions that they made content-wise. Half the Marvel movies were a waste of my time. But the business model in the psyche in which he approached it, I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to do. This is my plan. I planned this out. I'm sticking to it. If I run up against something, I will make minor adjustments. I'm not doing a wholesale upheaval. Why? Because once you blink, everybody watching the project is like, you know what? If the guy doing it doesn't have any faith in it, why should I shell my money out? And he never made that mistake. Feige never made that mistake. And that's the difference between the two. We get to see Marvel as a complete project because they followed through. We're looking and making judgments of an incomplete project in DC because they didn't. That's the difference. Not in the structure that he started with. I think the first three movies were the first three movies that should have happened. It's because we're looking at those in a vacuum because we never got everything else. That's your problem. You're looking at an incomplete project or product versus a completely fully developed one. So that's where I disagree with Gore. And anybody else who brings that up. I mean, everybody's got a right to their opinion. But like I said, I think that over and over again, and to the detriment of DC, people have failed to look at DC and appreciate the aspects that make DC what it is. You cannot look at DC through Marvel lens. There's two distinct things. To the genesis of everything that sprouted from. If you look back to the origin of DC Comics versus the origin of Marvel Comics, you'll see the errors that they came up with are largely tied to the stories that they tell now, even 60, 70 years later. When DC came out, crime, all kind of open warfare on the streets, World War II, Holocaust, all kinds of dark stuff was going on then. And those characters were born of those creators that made that. When Marvel came around, we were in that window. They call it the window of color because it was before the civil rights era hit the screen and the whole nation would see it. It was before Vietnam hit the screen. It was before the Kennedy assassination when we still trusted government and everything else. After World War II, you had that window from 1961 to about 1963 where you didn't have the kind of stuff that was affecting DC stories 20 years further. Now, if you notice, Marvel stories changed. As more stuff hit the news and the news wave, Stan Lee worked in stuff that he wanted to always work in.
X-Men was dark.
You got to see Black Panther. You got to see Luke Cage. You got to see all these things. But it had to happen in that society. They come from two different societies. Really, the only comparison is that they're comic book companies, really. And that's where those comparisons should really end.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying with that. Definitely, all that makes sense. And I do think after seeing the Snyder Cut and where the direction was going to go, and people starting to warm up more to Snyder's vision after the Snyder Cut, I think if they did finish with 2 and 3, we probably would have had more people like appreciate what he was going for. But yeah, it's just hard to tell at that point when BVS was like one of the most hated movies out there. So it's like you couldn't help but go back and think like should they have tried to course correct in a certain, well, not completely course correct, but like maybe try to try to fix the foundation from the start. But I don't know.
Well, listen, you know what the problem is you run right back into the same wall. Who are we listening to? We're listening to people that are sitting behind a keyboard, most of whom, trust me, were never going to go see this movie in the theaters to begin with. Most of them had already pulled their pants and were ready to shit on whatever was coming down the pipe before it even came out. I remember we were promoting these movies and we were hearing the same bullshit that we heard during its run before BVS was even out. I heard bullshit. Before Justice League was starting all the stuff that they would go through, we were hearing the bullshit. So it wasn't like, why are we, if you're a CEO, you're not me, you're not anybody on this screen. We can say dumb shit and do dumb shit, and it's not going to have any consequences. When you're controlling hundreds of millions of dollars, why are you listening to a fanboy, who has no stake in that game? Why are you course correcting the people who don't know what the fuck they're talking about for the most part? You are the producer. You are the studio head.
Is it just the fanboys though, or is it the casual movie-going audience as well? Because
the casual movie-going audience wasn't. Well, the casual movie-going audience shelled out $871 million. The casual moviegoer made Man of Steel $678 million. How many other? What did the last Superman movie make?
Well, Superman Returns, like around 500 million.
So the casual fan spoke. That's who should have been listened to. It's the other guys that really who spoke louder. Casual fan came, paid his money, saw it, and does what everybody else who consumes a product they like. They don't feel the need to always protest it and put up a sign saying, "Wow, look at this! I saw this, so you better like it too." Most people in general like what they like and they move on. And they speak with their dollars, because these movies right now, these movies aren't failing because of us. Blue Beetle's not making all these movies, the stuff that are bombing or are going to bomb. It's not us. It's the casual fans been turned off. That's who you should be listening to. They're speaking with their dollars, but here's the thing: they spoke with their dollars then, and they didn't listen to them.
I mean, Blue Beetle's coming out digital soon, so and it made 120. That movie was supposed to be an HBO movie, HBO Max movie. They're decent at the box office.
I mean, hopefully they'll find an audience when it gets to digital.